At first, everyone believed they were accidents. A college student goes out drinking, leaves a bar late at night, and days later, his body is found in the water. Police called them tragic drownings. Young men who drank too much, got disoriented, and accidentally fell into rivers. For a while, that explanation seemed believable, but then it happened again. Another city, another student, another body pulled from another river, and somehow the stories always felt disturbingly familiar. One victim vanished after leaving friends outside a bar. Another disappeared just minutes away from his dorm, and eventually people started noticing something else. Strange graffiti appearing near several of the recovery sites. A smiling face, sometimes with the word smile. Some witnesses even claimed certain symbols looked twisted, distorted, almost mocking. People began feeling uneasy because it no longer looked like random graffiti. And some former investigators started asking a terrifying question. What if these deaths were not accidents at all? What if someone was targeting these young men and leaving behind a smile? Tonight's story is the mystery known as the Smiley Face Killings. Most of the victims seemed completely ordinary. College students, young men with friends, families, plans for the future. Some played sports, some were academically successful, others were simply described as outgoing and confident. None of them looked like people about to disappear forever, and that made the cases feel even stranger. The stories often began in the most ordinary way imaginable. A party, a crowded bar, a late night with friends. The victims laughed, talked normally, drank like countless other students on a Friday night. Then eventually they left to head home. One victim was only minutes away from his dormitory. Another had just separated from friends moments earlier. And then they vanished. Calls went unanswered. Messages were never opened. At first, people assumed the same thing. Maybe he passed out somewhere. Maybe his phone battery died. Maybe he simply lost track of time after drinking. But as the hours passed, the atmosphere changed. Friends searched the streets, calling their names. Families contacted hospitals and police stations, and days later, the missing students were discovered dead, usually near water, rivers, canals, harbors, places close enough to the city to feel familiar, yet isolated enough to become terrifying after dark. Police explained the deaths the same way again and again. The victims were intoxicated. They likely became disoriented and accidentally fell into the water. At first, many people accepted that explanation. But as similar tragedies continued happening, a strange uneasiness began growing in the background. Why did the same kind of young men keep disappearing? Why did the same pattern keep repeating? And why did it always seem to end near water? There was one detail people could not ignore. Nearly every victim was found near water. Riverbanks, canals, harbors, drainage areas. The locations were different, but somehow the ending always looked the same. Bodies recovered from water. Police classified most of the deaths as accidental drownings. Alcohol was often found in the victims' systems, and many of them had last been seen walking alone late at night. So investigators concluded the same thing repeatedly. A drunk young man likely lost his balance, became disoriented, and fell into the water. But over time, details began emerging that made the cases harder to dismiss. Some victims were athletes, strong, physically fit. Several were known to be good swimmers. Others reportedly handled alcohol well. Friends and family members insisted these young men were not reckless enough to wander alone into dangerous areas. Then even more disturbing claims began surfacing. In some cases, people claimed traces of GHB had been found in the victim's blood. GHB, often referred to as a date rape drug, a substance capable of causing dizziness, memory loss, and rapid physical incapacitation. If those suspicions were true, the story changed completely, because this would no longer look like accidental drowning. It would suggest someone may have intentionally incapacitated the victims first, and that possibility deeply unsettled people. Then came another strange detail. Some recovery sites had reportedly already been searched before the bodies were eventually discovered there later, almost as if the victims had appeared afterward. And in a few cases, people even questioned the locations where bodies were found. Some were reportedly discovered in positions that seemed inconsistent with the direction of the water current. Was an intoxicated victim somehow swimming against the flow? Or had someone placed the body there afterward? Among investigators, an uncomfortable feeling began spreading. One case could be coincidence. 2 cases could still be bad luck. But after enough nearly identical deaths, people could no longer reassure themselves with the word accident. Then the mystery became even darker. Near several of the recovery sites, people reported finding strange graffiti nearby. A smiling face, a simple smiley symbol. At first, it looked meaningless. The kind of graffiti you could find anywhere in a city, on bridge walls, near railroad tracks, beside abandoned structures. Nobody paid much attention to it in the beginning. Graffiti was common, and smiley faces were everywhere. But as more bodies were discovered, the symbol stopped feeling harmless. Another victim, another river, another smiley face. People began whispering about it. Why did it keep appearing near death? Why did it keep showing up around the same kinds of cases? Then even stranger details emerged. Some witnesses claimed the graffiti was not always just a simple smiley face. In certain locations, the word smile had reportedly been written nearby. Other symbols appeared distorted. Some allegedly included horns. Others were described as twisted shapes that seemed almost threatening. A few people even claimed some markings resembled symbols connected to death. If those reports were true, then the graffiti no longer felt random. It started looking intentional, like a message or a signature. Some investigators wondered whether the symbols were being left behind deliberately, not just by one killer, but possibly by multiple people connected to the same crimes. That theory terrified people, because suddenly the deaths no longer looked isolated. They looked organized. As the theory spread, internet forums exploded with discussion. Newspapers covered the growing mystery. Documentaries began asking the same terrifying question. What if someone was deliberately targeting young men and leaving behind smiling symbols afterward? Of course, many people rejected the theory completely. Critics argued that smiley face graffiti exists almost everywhere, that people were forcing random symbols into unrelated tragedies, that fear was creating patterns where none actually existed. But even skeptics admitted one thing. The image was unforgettable. A smiling face, repeatedly appearing near death, as if someone was watching and smiling back. As investigators examined more cases, the similarities between victims became harder to ignore. These were not physically fragile people. Many of the victims were tall, athletic, strong. Some played competitive sports. Others regularly trained and exercised. Friends described them as confident young men who were difficult to overpower, and that raised uncomfortable questions. Could so many physically capable people really be accidentally stumbling into rivers on their own? Could they all truly become helpless in the exact same way? Families struggled to accept the official explanations. They knew who these young men were. They knew their habits, their personalities. The idea that they suddenly wandered alone into dangerous waterways and drowned without resistance felt far too simple. Then additional suspicions appeared. Some reports claimed the physical condition of certain bodies did not fully match the amount of time they were believed to have spent in the water. Others questioned the locations where bodies were discovered. None of these claims were officially confirmed, but they continued feeding suspicion. People started asking darker questions. Had someone approached the victims after they left bars? Had drugs been used? Had the victims been incapacitated first and afterward placed in the water intentionally? Former investigators later admitted that reviewing the cases gave them an unsettling feeling. Late-night disappearances, sudden loss of contact, bodies discovered days later, and nearby the recurring image of a smiley face. Individually, each case could still resemble an accident, but placed side by side, the similarities became difficult to forget. And slowly, more people began saying the same thing. This no longer felt random. As the death continued, some former investigators became convinced something far darker was happening. One of the most well-known voices was former detective Kevin Gannon. Alongside investigator Anthony Duarte, he began studying dozens of similar cases across the United States. And eventually, they made a shocking claim. The deaths might be connected. According to them, there were too many similarities to dismiss, too many repeated patterns, too many unanswered questions. They re-examined timelines, compared disappearance locations, tracked recovery sites, and studied reports connected to the graffiti. Slowly, a larger picture began forming. Young men leaving bars late at night, sudden disappearances, bodies recovered from water, and nearby strange smiling symbols. The investigators eventually claimed the number of possible connected victims might be enormous, not just a handful. Former detectives argued that at least 45 and possibly more than 100 deaths could fit the same pattern. That possibility stunned people, because if true, this was no longer a collection of isolated accidents. It could mean a large-scale serial crime operating across multiple states for years. And then came an even darker possibility. What if there was not just one killer? What if multiple people were involved? Some theories suggested an organized group, a network, a system operating in the shadows. If that were true, then the smiley faces might not be signatures at all. They could be signals, messages left behind for others involved. People's imaginations spiraled into darker territory. Who was responsible? How long had it been happening? And how many victims were never connected to the pattern? But despite the growing theories, one major problem remained. There was still no definitive proof, no clear eyewitnesses, no confirmed murder footage, no suspect tied directly to the deaths, and eventually public opinion split apart. Some believed the United States was facing one of the largest hidden serial murder cases in modern history. Others believed people were forcing unrelated tragedies into a terrifying conspiracy. But the former investigators refused to back away, because to them, looking at a single case might resemble an accident. Looking at dozens in a row felt like something else entirely. Despite the growing attention, law enforcement agencies largely maintained the same conclusion: accidental drowning, alcohol-related death, a tragic mistake made late at night. Official investigators remained extremely cautious about the serial killer theory, and in most cases, they rejected any direct connection between the deaths and the smiley face graffiti. Their reasoning was simple: there was no definitive evidence. Smiley face graffiti appears everywhere in urban areas, and not every victim matched perfectly. Some were students, others were already working adults. The locations differed, the timelines differed, and the circumstances surrounding each disappearance were never completely identical. Police argued that people were connecting unrelated tragedies into a single frightening narrative. Fear creates patterns, and once people begin searching for connections, they often start finding them everywhere. The internet only intensified that process. Rumors spread quickly, theories became larger, and eventually the mystery took on a life of its own. But for some families, those explanations never felt satisfying. They could not understand why healthy young men kept vanishing under strangely similar circumstances. Why so many disappearances happened after nights out drinking. Why so many bodies ended up in water. And why stories about smiling graffiti continued following the cases. Those questions refused to disappear. Former investigators also continued pushing back against the official explanation. They argued that any single case might still look accidental. But when viewed together, the similarities became deeply unsettling. Online debates continued for years. Some people became convinced the Smiley Face Killings represented one of the largest hidden serial murder cases in American history. Others dismissed the entire theory as an urban legend fueled by paranoia and internet speculation. But regardless of what people believed, one fact remained impossible to ignore. Young men kept disappearing, and somehow the smiling face kept appearing beside the mystery. As the years passed, the cases seemed to spread across the United States. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, New York, Pennsylvania. Again and again, similar stories continued appearing in different states. Late-night disappearances, young men leaving bars, bodies recovered days later near water. The repetition itself became disturbing. There were too many similarities, too many familiar details. And over time, people began feeling that strange sense of unease all over again. The dark riverbanks, the isolated waterways outside city streets, the smiling symbols reportedly appearing nearby. Together, the cases started feeling less like isolated tragedies and more like pieces of one long story. Even today, there is still no definitive proof that the Smiley Face Killings are real. No officially identified organization, no confirmed serial killer, no legally proven connection linking every death together. And yet, the questions remain. Why did similar deaths continue happening for so many years? Why did certain recovery locations seem so unusual? Why did allegations involving drugs, like GHB, appear in multiple discussions? And why did the smiley face stories refuse to disappear? The mystery only grew larger through documentaries, internet forums, and endless online debates. Even now, people continue searching, debating, revisiting the same unsettling possibility. What if these deaths were never accidents at all? At first, everyone thought they were accidents. Drunk college students, late-night disappearances, bodies recovered from rivers. The stories sounded tragic, but explainable. Yet the deaths continued. And over time, people started seeing patterns that became harder to ignore. Bodies near water, unanswered questions, possible drug involvement, and strange smiling symbols appearing nearby. Police still maintain that most of the deaths were accidental, and to this day, there is no definitive evidence proving the existence of a serial killer. But the questions never fully disappeared. Why did so many similar deaths continue happening? Why did the stories feel so connected? And why did the smiley face keep appearing near tragedy? If the graffiti was truly random, then why do people still remember it decades later? And if it was not random, then someone may have been leaving behind a message, a smile, appearing quietly beside death. And somewhere out there, people still wonder the same thing. Where will the next smile appear? If this story left you wondering, the next one is waiting for you. Subscribe and stay with us.